Welcome to Define You Radio, the place to be for real talk and real tips to help you define your personal and professional life. Class is in session with your host, the Southern Belle of Bold, Valencia Griffin Wallace. Pens and papers ready. Class is now in session.
Hey, kings and queens. It's your girl, Valencia Griffin Wallace, and welcome to episode 214. Class is in session today with Marlo the Poet Miller. To tell you a little bit about Marlo, she is a mother, grandmother, an author, and a survivor of domestic violence. She is going to share with us how she overcame domestic violence, how it changed her life, but most of all, us paying attention to the warning signs and the healing process afterwards. Today's episode is sponsored by the Move Retreat, because queens need a break too. You can find out more at valenciagwallace.com/events. With that being said, pens and papers ready. Class is now in session. Let's go ahead and welcome Marlo to the show. Hey, Marlo.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing great. We've been trying to schedule this for a while, so I know it's going to be a dynamic show.
Yes, ma'am.
So go ahead and tell the audience a little bit about you. Why don't you go ahead and fill in the blanks a little bit?
Okay. My name is Marlo Miller. Everybody puts the poet in the middle of it because I write poetry. I wrote a poetry book, and I do speaking engagements on poetry. I'm a mother of 2 kids. I have 2 grandbabies and 1 on the way. In between, I just try to help my community out as best as I possibly can.
You do a whole lot.
Yes. Yeah, I do a lot. I try to stay busy. You know, I get bored kind of easy, so I just try to stay busy as much as I possibly can.
I know the feeling. Yeah. I tend to use my free time or my downtime to take naps. And I wish I need to get in somebody's sleep study or something, because if you can make money, by sleeping, it's a perfect world for me. That's just my thoughts. So I know I've always seen you and followed you and known you as Marlo the Poet Miller. So let's touch on that a little bit, because I do know you write poetry. Is your poetry about domestic violence, or is it about anything?
It's just about anything, but I do have some poems that are related to domestic violence. But normally, people will give me a topic to write on for like an event that they're having, and then I will normally write my poetry around that event.
That's good. That's good.
Yes, ma'am.
And I know you actually wrote a piece, was it last year, a year before last, I think, for an event I had. How did you find yourself in a domestic violence situation?
I ended up marrying the wrong man, thinking God sent him to me, when really the devil in disguise, placing him in my life. So, and I tell people I met him in the wrong place. You never can meet your lifetime partner in the parking lot of a nightclub.
So y'all met in a parking lot. Did he put on a good guy front, or how did the relationship progress from the parking lot till before the domestic violence began?
Oh, he was a charmer. I mean, he said all the right things. He did all the right things. It's like he would just melt your heart. And we had one incident that happened before we actually got married, and it should have been a warning sign to me, but it actually got physical at one point before we got married, and I ended up having to go to the hospital because I had a concussion. My lip was swollen. My hand was all bruised up and everything. I mean, he was banging my head against the floor and everything like that. And he actually got sent to jail for that. But in the process, we kept communicating and everything like that. He was one of those seasonal people that I tried to turn into a lifetime person, and it just did not work.
How long were y'all dating before the first incident?
7 months. Yeah, it wasn't like really long, but we were dating, and then he of course went to jail for the incident, not because of what he had actually did to me at first. He had warrants and everything, and of course when they go to jail they find Jesus, and religious, and so when he got out, he was like, he's a changed man. He went to church, he got baptized. I mean, he was doing everything that I could possibly want him to do. But once he put that ring on my finger, Dr. Jekyll came out.
So so let me ask you this. Was he in jail for like a couple of months, a year? Like how long was
he was in for just a short period of time. It wasn't a year. I believe it was just a couple of months that he was in there for.
Okay, so you thinking he gets out, you think he's changed.
Yes.
You go ahead and say, I do. Then
yes.
What?
Cheating began, the verbal abuse began, then the physical abuse began, and it just was on and on until I just woke up one day and I just basically was just like, you know what, enough is enough. I can't even do it no more. And it was funny how it actually ended. I tell people it's so funny because they laugh when I tell them the story, because he was sitting on the bed, putting his shoes on. And I was just like, well, where are you going? And he was just like, well, I'm going to go buy a car. And I'm like, you're going to go buy a car? We got bills to pay. So I, thinking, I'm Billy Bad Booty, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
I said, well, if you leave, I'm going to pack up all your stuff and you're not going to be able to come back. So I was waiting for the blow or whatever, but he was just like, oh, go ahead, pack my stuff. I can go back to my mama's house. I was just like, what? And he said, pack my stuff. I can go back to my mama's house. So I said, oh, okay. I got those famous black trash bags, the hefty kind. I packed up everything that belongs to him. I even packed the lint that was in the drawer because I wanted to make sure he didn't leave nothing behind. And I sat and I waited and waited. And I think he actually thought that if he didn't come back, I was going to change my mind. So I called him on the phone like a couple of hours later, and I was like, well, where are you at? And he said, I'm at my brother's house. I was just like, oh, okay, well, I'll be there in just a few minutes. I took his stuff, I placed it on the sidewalk, and I drove off. And I came inside my house. It was like peace fell upon me. My house was just like peaceful.
How long was the time period between when y'all met and when it ended?
We were actually married for 9 years. But 7 of them we didn't live together. So for 2 years, for 2 years, it actually went on for 2 years.
Is that the father of your children?
No.
So was this your first time being in a domestic violence situation?
No. I tell people, and this is the sad part about my my story, is that I am 47 years old and I have never had a healthy relationship in my whole entire life. Never. If a good man walked in the door, I tell people right now, I probably wouldn't even know how to act because I'm not used to a good man.
Well, you know what a bad man is, so it just opposite.
Yeah. But what would scare me the most is that he was a good man. So it's like I would be waiting for like, okay, any minute now you're about to change it. Yeah. Like, okay, because, they always start off so good, but then they flip-flop once they know that they actually got you. That's the scary part about it.
So you think at this point you don't trust your own judgment, or?
No, I don't. What I love hard. Yeah. And I tend to lose myself in that person. And right now I'm trying to find out who I am and what I enjoy doing and what I like to do. So it's like I don't want to give myself to somebody and then lose myself to them.
Well, when you think back to your first boyfriend or your first relationship, roughly how old were you, and was that a domestic violence situation as well?
No, it wasn't a domestic violence, but it wasn't healthy either because he was a cheater.
So did your kids see in domestic violence?
Yes, my kids did. My daughter has a tendency to want to hit on her boyfriends because she tells me that she would rather hit them before they hit her.
And what do you say in response to that?
I say, girl, that is 5 to 10 and state 10. Keep your hands off of people's children.
Yeah.
Yeah, because my ex-husband, his mother actually died of domestic violence. So I used to tell him all the time, if you saw your mother die of domestic violence, why would you want to put your hands on somebody else's child?
And what would he say?
He couldn't come up with no good answer. Nothing at all.
Did you see domestic violence growing up?
I seen more like verbal. I don't remember like physical or nothing, but I know that my mom and dad, they used to argue all the time.
Was it abusive language being used? Like
yes, yeah.
I think that part, because when I think back to in my mind, things I remember from being younger, I remember my mama was a fighter, which explains me. I remember the abusive language from my stepdad to her, and I do remember, maybe one or two fights that I like witnessed, but because of how I am, and a child is always very protective of their parents, I would try to fight him, at a very early age, because me and him didn't get along anyway. So, but I wasn't like, I knew, like my aunts or different women I knew that were in abusive relationships. So I was always that woman to say, it'll never be me, and then I was a fighter. Like, that's my past. If anybody has read Motherless Child, you kind of already know the history here. But when I found I was in my early 20s, and it was a very quick relationship before the marriage, but it was signs there, a little, the possessiveness, but there was never any abusive language. So when I married this dude, and I always tell people, this is a marriage I don't count. I always refer to it that way. And the ink wasn't dry good on the marriage license. And when we went out one night, he was drunk, he hit me, and I was like, he has lost his mind, because I had never been hit. I didn't even get whippings growing up. And I lost my mind. And meaning, like, we were going at it like two dudes in the street. But it was because of that. And then, it became a regular thing. He would, get drunk. And for whatever reason, that possessiveness I thought was cute before became, really crazy, psychotic jealousy. But because I would always fight back, I had a hard time accepting that it was domestic violence. Even though, because I would give him a run for his money. Okay, I will say that. But the one thing I learned, 9 times out of 10, a woman is never going to whip a man. If the man is fighting you like you're another man in the street, and it doesn't matter how, I'm sure, well, maybe your strength has something to do with it. I don't know. But I mean, we would go. And I would be the one ended up with, a black eye and different things like that. And it was very crazy. But I said, when I think about that relationship, I said that taught me, because before that, I'm not gonna lie, I had no sympathy for people in domestic violence relationships.
Yeah.
Because I always thought, that's stupid, and it took that one relationship for me to see that it's more than, the physical part. It's like a whole psychological mind game that happens with that.
Yes.
And even though that relationship and marriage was a short time, it took years for me to bounce back mentally, because what a lot of people don't talk about, maybe more now than they used to, there is some PTSD that comes with dealing with domestic violence.
Oh, yes, definitely.
How do you think you would be different if you never had a domestic violence relationship?
Like, when you're born, everything is written already in your book of life. So it's like, when God wrote my book of life, he knew that on that day, this man was going to hit me, and this man was going to do that to me. So I say that it made me who I am today. It made me, a stronger person. It made me want to be an advocate for women and say, you know what, I've been there. I know what you're going through. Because, see, I was like you. I used to always say, well, why don't you stay? But then when it got to me, and people used to say, well, why did you stay? And I wanted to say, well, I tell people, why do you ask us why we stay? Why don't you ask the men why they put their hands on us?
Right.
So I was like you. I didn't have sympathy, because I used to be like, well, why would you say, why don't you just get up and leave?
Or some hot grits.
That's it. But it takes a woman 7 times to be abused before she'll leave. Before you wake up that one day and you say, you know what, I'm worth more than this. I'm worth more than being a punching bag. I'm worth more than having to cover up my scars with these long sleeves, or having to wear extra makeup to cover up this black eye. See, like, I have a messed up foot. My husband messed my foot up, and I love to wear high heels. Me and high heels used to be best friends, but now we're not so good friends, because I can only wear them for so long before I start to lean with it, rock with it, because my foot will hurt. But I love it, and I torture myself, but my husband messed my foot up. And I never went to the hospital because I didn't want to get questioned. So it's like I walk around now with a hurt foot where I can't wear my nice shoes that I love so much that I just look at all the time in the closet.
How long ago was this?
Oh, Lord. Our divorce was actually finalized, I believe, in January 2016.
And when did y'all separate?
So I believe it was in 2005, 2004 that we met. Yes.
Did you call him?
He came back 3 years later and he apologized. And I accepted his apology, because I told him, I said, because on Judgment Day, you have to stand before God and answer when he asks you, what did you do with the life that I gave you? Not me. And then it's like, if I don't forgive him, I still give him power over me. Because, see, he's out there smiling and living it up and having a good life, and he's remarried. So if I don't forgive him, I'm just going to sit over here and dwell in my own self-pity.
Right.
Yeah. So I couldn't give him power over me no more, so I forgave him. It's all good.
I don't even know what to say. Because I've forgiven my ex, of course. But I also don't have to see him or deal with him. And this was, like, I'm in my 40s and this was in my early 20s. And I remember maybe, what year is this, 2019? So maybe like 2 years, 2016, give or take.
Yeah.
He made a comment. It was like this whole thing. He reached out on Facebook and made a comment, and I instantly like went in a different pace, different place, different space. And I blocked him, reported him, all kind of stuff. And it was crazy, because I, forgive him, because I know he has to live his own hell. I do believe that.
Yes.
And my forgiveness extends to the fact that I can act like you no longer exist.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And to everybody has to deal with that in their own way. When anytime it comes to forgiving anybody, period. And for me, it was just like I said, because like the aftershocks of the relationship, to where I had developed a fear of anybody that was tall and slim and dark skinned with braids, to where I would immediately have an anxiety attack and nightmares and all of those things. So long after the relationship was over, I was still being affected with the aftershocks of it.
Oh yeah.
And that was like, I mean, I'm like, it would almost been easier just to scar him for some hot grits, put him in a wheelchair or something. You know, it was,
yeah.
You know, but one of the things I could say about Louisiana, because I did call the police several times, and Louisiana is a I can't think of what you call it, but Louisiana will pick up, like, you don't have to press charges, the state will.
Yeah.
And I know, I'm not going to say where you are, that's up to you, but in your state, do they do that? Will the state automatically press charges if you call the police out?
I'm not sure about that. Now I do know that I went and I got a protection order against him, because when we separated, he would call and threaten me at night, you know, threaten to burn the house down with me and my kids, threaten to have somebody come beat me up. And so when I called the police, you know, their thing was, because I've noticed too that police really don't like to get involved in domestic violence disputes at all, because they don't like the paperwork. They've even said that, you know, like, oh, well, we'll go to court on this, and they'll come in holding hands, and you know what I'm saying? So to them, it's like a waste of time. So when I actually called them out, they were telling me that because we were still married at the time, if he came over, I actually had to let him in the house because we were still married.
Because you didn't have the protection order.
So I went the next day and got one, because I was like, what kind of mess is that?
Yeah.
Like, I'm looking at them like, y'all really trying to get me killed.
And you didn't have him on well, they have police reports before that, but still, if I understand what you're saying, because I mean, if y'all were married, that is true.
Yeah.
To my knowledge.
That's what they said. Yeah. And that's crazy.
So when we kind of go back and talk about the signs, if a young woman, and it don't matter your age, you're still a young queen, is listening, what are one or two of the signs that should be a trigger that, hey, something not right with this dude or this woman?
Oh God, Jesus, there's so many. Especially if he wants to, like, isolate you, you know, like from your friends and family, you know, if he wants to have control, you know, like over who you talk to, where you go, you know, what you wear, you know, stuff like that. Definitely look for that. Yes.
And
I was like,
no, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
No, I was going to say also, watch for those little attitude changes that may not be always noticeable, like how they are when you're around other people, because if they go from 0 to 100 with the waitress or other people, then that, to me, that's definitely a sign that they may have some anger issues or whatever.
Yes. Jealousy, you know, I mean, it's a lot, you know, I mean, it is like a lot. But I always tell people, you know what I'm saying, I don't judge people. I tell people, you know, if you leave and you go back, I'm not gonna stop being your friend. I'm not gonna stop not being here for you, you know, because I've been there and I've done it. So I let people know that you know, I'm here. And whenever you you know what I'm saying, are ready to leave. Because only you know when you're sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Right.
Then I'm gonna be there with you. And if I gotta pick you up 8 times before you make up your mind on that last time that you're actually gonna leave, I'm gonna pick you up every time that you call me.
Mm. Did you
Mm-hmm.
ever go to like the battered women's shelter or something like that to get counseling, or have you never done
No.
that?
No, I've been to counseling, but it's like I'll start to go and then I just stop going. And it's like I'll start to go and then I stop going. So I think there's like still some part of me that needs to be healed from it, because I'm not all the way healed from it. But I don't know. I always make excuses when it comes to me, because I'm always trying to help everybody else. You know, it'll all come together.
Yeah. And I'm gonna
Yeah.
tell you one of the things that I've learned, because before I left, I started going
Mhm.
to the battered women's shelter for like their group
Mhm.
counseling therapy thing, just to sit in there and listen,
Mhm.
because I felt like it was a safe place.
Mhm.
I don't know that I ever shared what was going on, but I did, go and listen to the other
Mhm.
ladies'
Mhm.
stories, and that helped me. Um, and then also learned about making a plan to leave. And this is one of the things I would advise, the people that's in that situation, is sometimes the most dangerous time is when you leave.
Mhm.
So when I say make a plan to leave, and this is what I did, like I put me and my son's birth certificates, important information, stuff like that, a set of clothes, all of that kind of stuff at my sister's house. So if so that way, if something, when that time came that I knew I had to go, I didn't have to
Mhm.
worry about grabbing anything. Um,
Yes.
One of the things I did as well, I knew was important, was having it on paper. Meaning, yeah, I called the police, so don't, all of that. Don't call the police on your man, keep the police out your business. I don't believe in none of that, because I believe when it comes to defending your life, it's
Yes.
always good to have paper backing yourself up, because you don't know what may happen. So being that I had the police reports, and then even with the protection orders, it's paper,
Yep.
and a lot of times the other person, a man will tell you, or whoever, that's paper, that don't mean nothing. But at the end of the day, it's to back you up. I always say that, like, God
Yes.
forbid, if anything
Yes.
would have had to happen, I was
Yep.
backed up by my police reports and the protection orders. And notice I'm
Mhm.
putting S's on those, because yes, there was a lot of back and forth with both of those.
Yes.
Before the final, like, I'm done, because I'm gonna have to really hurt this dude who's gonna take care of my kid. And that
Yeah.
was like the thing that last time, that I knew the next time somebody was gonna die. It was more, my greatest concern was who was going to raise my son.
Mm.
And he was like, I
Yep.
don't know, 2, 3, somewhere up in there. So he had like a whole lot of time he needed his mama for. And I didn't want my decisions to affect the rest of his life like that. So I
Yeah.
knew, it had to change, but it did make me scared of getting in another relationship, just because of how quick it changed. Like, literally, it went from 0 to 60. It's a constant healing process. If I said that correctly, but like, you're gonna always, I don't want to say always be healing, but it's kind of like with somebody dying. Um,
Yeah.
like, you're not going to go from 0 to everything's okay the next day or the next year. It's something you're constantly healing from more and more each day. But I think with domestic violence, it affects you so much. It's kind of like that scar. Like, you
Yeah.
don't think about the scar until you look at it, but it's still a scar. So it's like evidence or residue or something. I know what I'm trying to say.
I
So
got
let's talk about your kids. I know you kind of touched on your daughter, and
yes.
but let's talk about your son, because when we talk about obstacles, you face an obstacle as far as dealing with your son. So what was the obstacle you had to deal with him?
I had to let's see. Sometimes it's hard for me to talk about, but he graduated in June 2009. In July of 2009, he got arrested and locked up on capital murder charges, and he was locked up for 2 years.
So he was found not guilty?
Yes, what had happened was his grandmother on his father's side and his uncle had plotted to kill his step grandfather, and the week that it happened, something was telling me, because I kept saying, "Are you sure you want to go? You don't want to stay at home, with your mom and stuff." He's like, "No, I want to go. I want to go." And I said, "Okay." I said, "Don't let nothing happen to where the police have to come and have to come and get you." And he left. And when he came back, I knew something was off because him and his friend were just arguing too much. And I was just like, "What's wrong with y'all? Why are y'all arguing?" And I left on a Tuesday to go to my mom's house, and I hadn't heard from him all day. I was just like, "God, that is strange." And then his uncle called, and he was just like, "Hey, have you heard from your son?" And I was just like, "No, I ain't heard from him." And he was just like, "Okay, well, when you see him, tell him to call me, but don't call me on his phone." I was just like, "Okay, then." Got back home, and I'm waiting and waiting. And it was about like 9 o'clock. He had called, and he was just like, "Mama, they got me." And I was just like, "Who got you?" He said, "The police." I'm thinking, Lord, this boy done got caught selling drugs, So I'm grabbing my purse, I'm trying to head out the door. I'm thinking, which bail bondsman am I going to call? All kinds of stuff. And I said, "Well, what they got you for?" And he said, "Capital murder." And I just fell to the ground. I couldn't even, my friend had to pick up the phone. I couldn't even function. I mean, it was just like, you know what I'm saying? Like when you go from seeing your kid every day to having to share 30 minutes with your mom, your dad, his friends, his sister, my grandmother, it's hard, especially like when you just got letters and you got phone calls and stuff. So it was like really, really hard on me. Like for those 2 years, I just, oh God. I mean, I fasted and I prayed so hard during those 2 years that it was just unbelievable. And so after, he actually had to testify against his grandmother. And because I told him, I said, now if you didn't have nothing to do with it, you better sing like a canary. I mean, you better tell. Because he got arrested on Tuesday, and on that Friday, he was supposed to go sign with the minor leagues baseball. My dad had it all set up and everything. And he told me he didn't have nothing to do with it, and blah, blah, blah. So, and I told him, I said, I don't care if somebody calls you a snitch, whatever, but you better tell. And he told what happened. And his grandmother ended up getting life in prison. And on the day that him and his friend got released, the district attorney said, "I've never let nobody go home on a capital murder charge." Never said bail, nothing.
Yeah.
But when we left the courthouse that day, we actually had to have law enforcement follow us all the way to the hotel where my mom and dad was staying at. And they actually had to follow us all the way out of town. It was a hard time.
What did he learn, or what did he do with basically almost like a second chance?
He doesn't really talk about it. I try to get him to share his testimony. And I guess like through me, I share his testimony.
Yeah.
I figured one day God's going to let him open up his mouth and actually share his testimony with kids and other people and let them know. But right now, he doesn't talk about it. He won't talk about it. He doesn't share any of that part of his life with me or anybody else. It's just, he says that he's forgiven them. In order for him to get to heaven, he has to forgive them. Him and his dad, they now have a relationship. Because at the time, his dad kind of, his dad was there more for his mom and his brother than he was for my son. But after he heard him testify, it kind of all came together. So they're building a relationship now.
Yeah.
So he's a little bit more forgiving on that part than I am. I'm trying to forgive. Right. So, but he like I said, he just doesn't talk about it. I try not to press him about it.
Yeah.
So I figure one day when he's ready and something happens to make him want to talk about it, then, he'll have an awesome testimony. Yes.
I could only imagine, being a mom and, like you said, going from seeing your child every day to 30 minutes.
Yes. And then when they actually moved him, because they kept moving him from jail to jail, and when they actually moved him all the way to like Monroeville, it was just too hard for me to go and see him. What I'm saying? Like, it was so far that it was just hard, and I could only go so often. But I thank God for my mom and my dad, because if not, then my poor baby probably would have starved, because I was only making so much, couldn't put a lot on the books and stuff. But
right.
My dad made sure that, I'm talking about every week, he had money on the phone, money on his books. They went up there every weekend to see him. My daddy was on them like a pit bull. I mean, yeah. So, yeah, my daddy stayed on them constantly.
And that's crazy. Basically, he sat in jail for 2 years for something he had nothing to do with.
Nothing at all. Just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Trouble is easy to get into, but hard to get out of.
Just like marriage.
Yes.
I say that when, especially, kind of, going back to our domestic violence marriages, it's easy to get married, but them divorces.
You see how long it took me to get mine? 7 years. Like 7 long years.
It took how I can't think of how long. I think it definitely took longer than the actual marriage lasted. It was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm saying they need to make some laws as far as with that part.
Yes. So they sure do.
Marlo the Poet Miller.
Yes.
When did you start? And what made you start writing poetry?
I started writing poetry in 2014. I had a lady that was at my church, and she told me, she said, Marlo, I do not think you know what you are worth. You are constantly giving, and you never receive anything. So I want you to go home. I want you to look in the mirror, and I want you to write me a poem, and I want you to tell me what you see, about the woman looking back at you. So my first poem I ever wrote was The Woman in the Mirror. And then after I wrote that, I sat down and something just caught me and made me write this poem entitled, Do I Qualify to Be Called a Woman of God? And I went and I read that poem at one women's brunch. And when I wrote that one poem, it took off. I mean, and that's how everybody knows me. People tell me all the time that poem should be like worldwide. Everybody should hear that poem. And so after that, I started getting people saying, hey, can you write a poem for this? And hey, can you write a poem for that? And then I would sit down, and I would just write poems on different things and everything. And then I would go read them at these women's brunches. And that's just how it manifested.
I could write anything. But with poems and poetry, because I think I'm too analytic, right? And I overthink it a little bit. My mom wrote poems, and but I'm like, okay, with a poem, you can't have, you got to think about like your sentence structure. Is it going to rhyme? Is it not going to rhyme? How many, lines and those things, where I find more freedom in just writing. But it's poems are very interesting. And I remember, in school learning different kinds of poems and all of those things. And I wish I could write poems because back in the day, I wanted to be a rapper. But I can't, I can't. I'm like, you have to really be able to be kind of clear and to the point with your thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
So that in itself is awesome. So why do you continue after, all this time and, you still learning and you're still growing? Why do you
Mm-hmm.
continue to even tell your story of domestic violence instead of leaving that in the past and just leaving it in the past?
If I can share my testimony, if I can write a poem about it, or if I can go and speak on it, and I can just touch one person, then I think that I've done my duty.
Mm.
Mhm. It's like I want to, if I can inspire at least one person out of my whole entire life, whether it's like with my poetry, we talk about domestic violence or anything, and somebody can come up to me and say, you know what, because of you, I didn't give up.
Yeah.
Then I think I would be like complete. I think that would just be like the aha moment.
Mm. And it probably also helps you heal. It's like one of those things that, you talk about and nobody would, look at you if anybody follows you on social media and be like, yeah, she's a victim of domestic violence or a survivor of domestic violence or anything. So I think you sharing your story on the other side, so to speak, definitely helps women that have, in it before they go into it or, never, whatever, just puts a different face on it. What I found is like when I do happen to talk about it, because it's not something I talk about a lot, for somebody to hear that I was, in a domestic violence relationship, it's like, what? No, you can't pick out somebody because of how they look or how they act and say what situation may or may not happen to them. So I think that's great that you share it and you let people inside your world, because that takes a lot of guts. People don't realize that.
Yeah, it does. It does, because we're constantly getting judged.
Yeah. When you think about your life thus far and your ultimate goal in life, what would you have accomplished by May 2021?
I would have written two more of my poetry books, my autobiography, and I would have showcased my fashion show in New York City.
Love it. Well, you said it on the show, so like now it's like permanently out there. So if somebody is listening to this show in May 2021, y'all check up on her. Looking for her.
That's it.
Marlo, you are such a dynamic woman with such a sweet disposition, and I'm glad definitely to be connected with you, and I know how to get in touch with you in more than one way. But
yes, ma'am.
When the audience wants to follow you, get in touch with you, find out a little bit more about you and your world, how would they do that?
Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. It's all the same. Marlo the Poet Miller.
Marlo the Poet Miller. And of course, her information will be posted on Define You Radio's Facebook page and Instagram as well. So with that being said, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yay. Pens and papers down. Class is officially over. Make sure you connect with our guests and our show at the Define You on Facebook and Instagram. Until next time, remember your past doesn't define you. It gives you definition. And what you do with that is up to you.
Thank you for listening. Connect with the show at the Define You Facebook. Until next time, remember your past doesn't define you. It gives you definition, and what you do with that is up to you.